In the weaving district of Nishijin, in the older part of Kyoto, there is a woman who has spent 41 years working with her hands in conditions that would destroy most people's skin. She handles rough silk thread, dry wooden looms, cold water in winter. She is 73 years old. Her hands look like she is in her early 50s. Not moisturized, not plump in the way of filler, structurally young, with even tone and no crepey texture along the backs of her fingers or her forearms. She spends less than $3 a month on what she puts on her skin. That number is the thing that stops most people, not the result, the cost. Because we have been taught very carefully and very deliberately that the distance between damaged and restored is always measured in dollars. The more you spend, the closer you get. And if your skin is still crepey, still thin, still showing the crepe paper texture along your hands and arms that arrived somewhere after 60, the answer the industry gives you is always the same. You have not spent enough yet. What the women of Nishijin know, what the older women in Okinawa Prefecture's fishing villages have practiced without interruption, and what the grandmothers in the mountain communities of Nagano still do as part of ordinary daily life is that crepey skin on the hands is not primarily a moisturizer problem. It is a barrier problem. And the barrier problem was largely caused by what we were told to put on our skin in the first place. This channel exists because that story deserves to be told completely, not the version that ends with a product recommendation. The version that ends with the record. The practices I'm going to describe come from the daily lives of women in Okinawa Prefecture, the traditional districts of Kyoto, and the rural communities of Nagano, places where these methods have never been replaced by anything modern, because nothing modern has proven worth the trade. Let's start with what crepey skin on the hands actually is, because the word gets used loosely, and the looseness serves the industry more than it serves you. The crepe texture, that fine, papery, slightly gathered quality along the backs of the hands, the inner forearms, sometimes the wrists, has two separate causes that are almost always conflated. The first is collagen and elastin reduction, which is real, gradual, and starts earlier than most people realize. The second is chronic barrier disruption. That second one is almost entirely preventable and in many cases partially reversible. The industry conflates them because a structural problem implies a structural solution, and structural solutions are expensive and proprietary. A barrier problem, honestly described, has a boring answer. The skin barrier, its technical name, is the stratum corneum. The outermost layer of the epidermis functions like a fitted tile floor. Lipids fill the spaces between cells. When those lipids are intact, the skin holds water, resists environmental damage, and maintains a surface tension that reads to the eye as firmness. When those lipids are repeatedly stripped, the tiles stay but the grout disappears. The skin loses water continuously. It thins. The surface becomes irregular. The body's inflammatory response activates. Over years, this produces exactly the texture people describe as crepey. Here is the number that changes everything. In a study published in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology, researchers found that skin exposed to surfactant-based cleansers showed measurable barrier disruption within 20 minutes of a single wash, and that this disruption was cumulative with repeated exposure. 20 minutes, and we have been washing our hands with surfactant-based soap, dish soap, antibacterial gel, and scented hand lotion, most of which contains the same stripping agents multiple times a day, every day, for decades. The women in Nishijin do not use conventional hand soap at the workspace. They use water and a small amount of rice bran paste. They have used some variant of this since the Edo period in the 17th century, when Nuka fermented rice bran became a standard bathing and skincare material in Japan. The chemistry is not mysterious. Rice bran contains ferulic acid, a compound studied for its ability to support lipid integrity in skin tissue. It cleans. It does not strip. Now, the villain portion of this story needs to be told with dates, because dates are what separate documented history from a feeling. In 1938, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration gained regulatory authority over cosmetics through the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. At that point, the agency required that cosmetic products not be adulterated or misbranded. What the law did not require was safety testing before a product reached the shelf. Manufacturers were largely trusted to regulate themselves. That framework, the one written in 1938, was not substantially updated for 84 years, until the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act passed in 2022, 84 years. In 1976, the cosmetics industry created the Cosmetic Ingredient Review Panel, funded by the Personal Care Products Council, which is the industry's own trade association. The panel was positioned as an independent safety review body. It has reviewed over 4,000 ingredients in the decades since. It has no enforcement power. Its findings are advisory. A company can receive a panel finding that an ingredient raises safety concerns and continue using that ingredient with no legal consequence. The surfactants that strip your skin barrier were reviewed. The synthetic fragrances that trigger chronic skin inflammation listed on every American label as a single word, fragrance, with no required disclosure of the compounds inside, a transparency standard the European Union moved away from in 2003 were reviewed, and the products containing them continued to be sold and marketed specifically to women over 50 as anti-aging solutions, and priced at a premium designed to signal that the solution was serious. That is not carelessness. That is architecture. In the same decades that American women were buying increasingly expensive hand creams and experiencing increasingly advanced crepey texture because many of those creams contained the same stripping agents their soaps contained, suspended in occlusive bases that temporarily hid the damage, the women in Nagano's agricultural villages were doing something unglamorous and nearly invisible. They were applying warmed Tsubaki oil, camellia oil pressed from the seeds of Camellia japonica to their damp hands before outdoor work. Not after. Before. The logic is inverted from what we were taught. Pre-application on damp skin fills the lipid channels before the barrier is challenged. Post-application on dry skin after the damage is done acts as a surface seal over disrupted tissue. One prevents, one conceals. The American hand lotion paradigm is built almost entirely on the second approach, because it requires daily reapplication, because the barrier damage never actually heals. Camellia oil has an oleic acid composition of roughly 82 to 88%. Oleic acid is structurally compatible with human sebum. It absorbs without residue. It was used by geisha in the traditional districts of Gion and Pontocho in Kyoto, not as a beauty product in the modern sense, but as a maintenance material, something that kept the skin functional under the demanding conditions of their work. It costs, at a reputable source, somewhere between $6 and $12 for an amount that lasts several months when used correctly. A few drops on damp hands, twice a day, before exposure. There is a woman in Naha, Okinawa, who is 81 years old. She raised 4 children. She spent 30 years working in her family's small textile business, handling materials daily. She has never used a commercial hand cream. What she uses is a preparation her mother taught her. Warmed camellia oil with a small addition of dry kombu powder seaweed, left to infuse overnight and strained in the morning. She applies it before her morning walk and before bed. Her monthly cost is under $3. When I say her hands are remarkable, I mean they are not the hands of an 81-year-old by any standard I was prepared for. The skin along her knuckles is smooth. There is no gathered texture. The tone is even. She told me, "My mother said the skin is always thirsty before you can see it. By the time you can see it, you have already waited too long." That sentence has stayed with me longer than anything a dermatologist has said in a press release. The kombu addition is worth addressing specifically because it is not arbitrary. Brown seaweed, including kombu, contains fucoidan, a sulfated polysaccharide that has been studied for its effects on skin cell regeneration and collagen synthesis. The research is not conclusive by pharmaceutical standards, which require a different level of evidence than centuries of consistent use in a population with visible results. But the compound exists, it is real, and it was not discovered by a skincare company. Now, Japanese women did not invent any of this. That distinction matters for the authority of what you are hearing. In ancient Rome, women used olive oil and pumice on their skin as both cleanser and barrier support the same oil logic, a different plant. In Ayurvedic tradition going back over 3,000 years, sesame oil applied before bathing abhyanga was a daily practice to maintain skin integrity and joint mobility. Korean women in the Joseon period used camellia oil for both hair and skin maintenance in ways nearly identical to what Kyoto geisha practiced. Persian women in the medieval period used rosewater preparations that worked on the same barrier support principle, adding to the lipid layer before stripping rather than after. These traditions arrived at the same answer independently in different climates, in different centuries, using different plants. Japanese women did not invent barrier-first skincare. They simply never stopped doing it. And that is the distinction: preserved, not invented, that carries the most weight when you are deciding what to believe. What you can do starting tonight, with materials available at any drugstore or Asian grocery for under $3 combined. Switch from stripping your hands with conventional soap and hand sanitizer to rinsing with water when possible, using a Castile-based soap with no added fragrance when needed, and applying 2 to 3 drops of camellia oil. It will be labeled tsubaki oil in Japanese grocery stores, and it appears in some drugstore skincare lines, though the concentration and purity varies to your hands while they are still damp from washing. Not as a treatment, as a replacement for the lotion you are currently applying after you strip your barrier with the cleanser. The results are not dramatic in 7 days in the way marketing language promises. What happens in 7 days is that your barrier stops being damaged every morning. What happens in 30 days, if you are consistent, is that the barrier begins to repair. What happens in 60 to 90 days is visible to other people. The marketing claim in my title used the word reverses. I want to be precise with you because you deserve precision. What restores in this timeline is the barrier, the lipid layer, the water retention that gives young skin its surface tension. What does not reverse is the structural collagen loss that comes with age. That is a different mechanism and a more honest conversation. But barrier-driven crepey texture, which is a significant portion of what most women over 60 are experiencing on their hands, that is not permanent, that is damage that accumulated. And damage that accumulated can stop accumulating. The first and most important thing is to stop doing what caused it. Before you go, I want to ask you something. When you think about the women in your life who had the best skin, a grandmother, an older neighbor, someone you remember from childhood, did they spend a lot of money on it? Or did they do something simple every single day that everyone around them eventually stopped doing because something newer was being sold? And if you remember a woman like that, do you remember what she put on her hands? If you are the kind of woman who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit margin, you already know what to do with this channel. In the next video, I'm going to talk about what happened in 1971 when synthetic retinol entered mainstream cosmetics. Not the success story the industry tells, but the original clinical context. It was removed from the specific committee that approved its cosmetic use, and the Okinawan women who have maintained the skin turnover that retinol claims to restore without touching a single lab-synthesized compound for generations. The contrast is not subtle.